Good evening. I'm Katy Dunn, an educational counselor here at PrepMatters, and I am delighted to welcome you to tonight's town hall meeting. We know you have many questions about college and college admissions, and I am so pleased to be able to welcome two fantastic panelists this evening to answer them. We truly would like this to feel like a town hall, just as if we were all in the same room. So throughout the webinar, we invite you to please use the Q&A function to ask questions of our panelists. You will also see that you have the option of liking or upvoting a question to emphasize that you are also interested in the answer. I am joined today by my colleague, Jeff Knox, Director of Educational Planning at PrepMatters. And Jeff and I will keep an eye on the Q&A so that we can guide the conversation. A few weeks ago, I asked an 8th grade student, "What has changed for you during the pandemic?" He looked at me quizzically and said, "You mean other than everything?" And I love working with teenagers because they always call me out when I ask a stupid question. The college admissions process is daunting under the best of circumstances. And for high school students this year, the circumstances are far from that. So many things have changed. And yet, still many things remain the same, looming. We have invited two admissions experts here tonight to help us sort through some of the stress and focus on what we do know, what we can control, and how we can approach the college admissions process with confidence and authenticity, even for these next few slightly complicated cycles. To get us started, I will introduce our panelists, and I have asked them to kick us off by thinking about how we can manage this year's admissions process for seniors with as little stress as possible. We will begin by welcoming Tom Abeyta, Director of Admission at Oberlin College. Tom grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where he says the desert meets the mountains and people love to eat green chili peppers. He received his undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering from the University of New Mexico and interned with NASA at a research center for about a year before deciding that higher education was his career path. He joined the Oberlin admissions team in 2001 after working with college students for 6 years at the University of Colorado Boulder. He speaks with joy and humor of the smart, funny, and talented students who not only make up the eclectic community at Oberlin College, but also make the world a better place. Welcome, Tom. What is your one piece of advice for seniors for how to have the most successful college process with the least amount of stress?
Gosh, again, you're asking me to limit it to just one?
We have all night.
I know. Well, thank you so much for having me. And again, thank you for that great introduction. And so happy to be here. And just, I wish I can see your faces so then we can, we can respond that way too. But again, I know that, I don't know if people today have the opportunity to react or whatever to show things too. But anyway, I would say my piece of advice is just, first of all, it's easier to say than to do, but this whole idea of even just relaxing and just and thinking that it's going to be like, it is going to be okay, right? I think that for a lot of students, if this is your senior year, I think that for you to work along with your family, work along with your parents, and whoever's there with you, because if you think about it, this may be the last year that you have together, maybe even within the same household, right? And so to make sure that you're working together and you're talking about these things, because sometimes I think even within the whole college search process, if you're feeling a certain way about a school or about the process, if you keep it inside and you're not talking about it, then it can just continue to build up that stress. And I know sometimes, especially if there's disagreements with that's a good time for both students and families and parents to kind of talk it out, to set forth those expectations. And what does that mean? A real practical thing is that if you have a lot of things to talk about, just pick one day a week and just, if it's just on Saturdays, we're going to talk on it, or don't bug me about college all during the week, but this one day, if that's our time to talk about it, you can keep a journal, take notes, write out all the different questions that you might have or issues that you're having. And then on that one day, you guys can talk about that as a family.
I love that advice. I also love that you found a way to help make us all grateful for the quality time we are spending in our homes with our families right now, which is a nice way of looking at some of the current circumstances. So welcome, Tom. We are also joined tonight by Louisa Borgos, Assistant Director of Admissions at Virginia Tech. She has served in several roles at Tech, including working for the Student Success Center, Cultural and Community Centers, the Graduate School Office of Recruitment, Diversity, and Inclusion, and the Provost Office of Inclusion and Diversity. Louisa is an advocate and liaison for underserved and marginalized populations. She earned her bachelor's degree from James Madison University and her master's from Virginia Tech. Her research and career interests focus on advocacy, access, retention, pipeline programs, and student success. I am especially excited to welcome Louisa tonight because I was honored to have her as a guest on a previous panel, and I know she has great insight and great energy to share with our students. So Louisa, welcome, and what is your advice for seniors?
Hi, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me tonight. A little background, if you hear my dogs in the background, is they're mad that I kicked them out of the room. Working from home problems, right?
Mine too.
So if you hear anything, that's just them trying to be in the room and feeling FOMO. So, all right. So I guess I have two advice for everyone. One is definitely be kind. Be kind to yourself. I think a lot of people during this time and during the college application process forget to just take a minute to be kind to yourself. I think we're always focusing on being kind to others, which is definitely important. But I do think during this time, as you have all this pressure from college and yourself, just be kind and just take a breathe for a second. And then my second advice would be, and this is because I could kind of relate to this as working from home and everything changing with COVID, is try to set up boundaries between your home and when you're doing work and when you're having your own personal time, and like, again, kind of going off being kind, right? Separating that. Like if you need to make hours where you do make sure you are doing work, but then you also stick to hours where you are quote unquote off, and that includes from school and doing work, please do so. We understand you may have many limited extracurricular activities to do. So just still take a break. I think that has been very difficult, and at least for myself, to separate life from home and life from being at home and relaxing. So I would just definitely, I think if you're able to do that for yourself, hopefully the college application process will go a lot smoother and a lot less stressful.
What I love about both of these answers, and with starting with a question like this, is it reminds us that that the folks who get into admissions are in that field because you actually genuinely care about students and your school and kind of building a student and school community. And so it's nice to remember that these people that we can't see that feel like they have so much riding on this process are also humans who are living in the same pandemic we're living with, looking at our dogs, quarantining with our children. So I love that those were the angles both of you took. So to get entirely away from thoughts that are, positive and supportive for most of us right now, let's talk a little bit about standardized testing. I get this question a lot. Many students now are, I think, perhaps seeing a little more possibility of finding a day for a standardized test. But of course, if you're a senior, we're getting closer and closer to deadlines. Meanwhile, both of your universities and many, many others across the country have recently, or in the past several months, determined that they will not require standardized tests this season. So I think it does create a lot of stress for students to kind of wonder what to do in those circumstances. Do I push myself to try and take this test? What impact will it have on my application if I don't have test scores or don't have test scores that I feel reflect my academic potential? And kind of how should I navigate those questions when I'm also managing a senior year course load, likely virtually, and some of the other stress. So do either one of you want to jump in on that first? Go ahead, Tom.
I'd be happy to talk about it. So first of all, I know Oberlin, we did decide to go test optional. We've been talking about it for many years. And so this was something that it wasn't like, oh, well, everyone else is going test optional, and so I guess test optional. In fact, we're doing for the next 3 years, we're going test optional so that we can study it. But we've always participated in something that we call a holistic review of an application, right? And so there's many different factors that goes into, reading and trying to determine, will this student be successful here? Because that's really what the whole purpose of a standardized test, right? It's supposed to be a predictor of first-year success in college. So it's a predictor, but there's also many other predictors, like the rigor of your curriculum, your overall GPA. So we're looking at what type of leadership skills students have had, the influence and the impact to their community. And so I think that when we look at that, I would say, gosh, again, we are a selective institution, same as Virginia Tech, both of us, we have far more well-qualified applicants, right, than we have spaces for. So really what we're trying to do as admissions counselors within this, selective process is that we build communities, right? And so of this great pool of applicants, what we're trying to do is determine, who would we like to give a spot to, because we see that they have great potential and they can really add to our community. In the case for testing, right, again, it's been crazy, right? You've heard stories of students signing up for tests. They show up at a school and it's unavailable. I think there's just the mental health stress of even just thinking, unsure with everything going on in our world right now. Am I in the best mental state to sit down, and then over a period of 3.5 to 4 hours, that's going to determine everything for me. And so again, I think that you need to ask questions. Obviously, I think many institutions that are test optional now, but it could make a difference. Some schools are saying, well, we're test optional, but if you want to be considered for merit scholarships, then you have to submit a test, right? And so fortunately, we're not one of those institutions that's doing that. I think we're able to still determine we're still gonna do that. And so you should ask that. I think it could make a difference. I think that when you look at what the test averages are and ranges for certain schools, if you feel that maybe my GPA isn't the best reflection of my ability and maybe my test score could help me, then I would say go ahead. Again, I'm not going to be cut and dry and say this is when you need to submit and this is when you don't. I think it's really going to be a discussion between you and your guidance counselor, or you and whoever's kind of helping you through this process. Obviously through PrepMatters too, they can also give you some advice on maybe your particular situation. But I wouldn't stress too much about it. This is the year that I would think that there's going to be the most flexibility with admissions officers about testing and even about admission. And this may be in the next question coming down, but I know a lot of people are thinking, well, a lot of students deferred this year. And so are you still going to have space next year? Is it going to be that much harder for me now because so many people deferred? Well, we deferred twice the number of students this year than we did last year, but it's still, it's significant. But we also enrolled a class that was less, under the target. And so as we speak to our colleagues out there and other directors and other, admissions professionals, I don't think people are going to be shy on offers of admission this next coming year. And so just kind of take it from me, at least as an insider, and at least the discussions that we've had, we're not going to be more selective in that sense. I think we're going to be more generous because we're unsure about even what people are going to do when they say they defer. Will they even come back? But again, this idea of testing, sure, I think there's many different things that we're going to look at, and if I wouldn't stress too much about it. I think that this is our job. This is what we've dedicated. Any admissions office, there's multiple decades worth of experience that people are looking at, and especially a lot of schools will read regionally, right? And so they're going to read from a certain part of the country. So they get to know schools and they have histories of, hey, a student from this school with this GPA has done well at our school. So in this age of data analysis, there's a lot of different predictors. And so we're looking at that, and we're also just relying on your teachers and your guidance counselors that know you well. And so if you don't have test scores, then we'll look at everything else in the application with your teachers, recommendation letters, and then how you've done on your transcript, which is a reflection over the last, 3.5 years, rather than just a one-time sit down.
3.5 hours. Right. Excellent. And certainly I have one of the questions on the list is to talk about deferrals. So thank you for jumping ahead for that thought. Louisa, what are you seeing at Virginia Tech?
Yeah, I love bringing this up to all my high school visits. And recently with a counselor, we were having a conversation. And can you imagine sitting down for 3 hours with a mask on and someone random happening to sneeze? And then you already get distracted in that test, all right? So we are understanding this behind the scene. That's definitely one, flexible, right? We're being flexible. Also, I always tell students, we go back to that holistic application. There's 4 years of your high school. Do you think that is going to weigh as much as a whole test? You did 4 years of high school. And second, usually a student will not solely be denied because of a test score. That's never the only reason someone is denied. So I know you don't want to say that word, right? But usually that's how students kind of, it gets across for them. It's like, you know, okay, thank you for saying that. Usually it will never be the reason why you got denied.
Right. That is a great point.
Multiple things that we're looking at, right? So if you have to think of it that way, and I'm trying to just, you know, make you think of it differently, because like I said, most students are going to always come and think of harsher on themselves. So that's what I always tell students. Now, when it comes to my recommendation of if you should put a test score, another thing that we told students is if you decide, when we mean optional, is that it is an option. It is up to you. We're not going out there if you don't put it and asking SAT, hey, did they really not take a test? Did they really? We're not doing that. So when we mean optional, we definitely mean optional. So it is your choice. I always say if you feel comfortable and it reflects your academic abilities, put it. If you believe that is what it reflects your academic abilities. If you believe that you did that and maybe that was your first run and you wanted to take it again, but then, you know, COVID happened, then maybe make that decision, right? Know whether that was a best choice for you or not. So that's kind of how I see when you are analyzing whether you can or you should put a test score or not. Right now, we're having a lot of students tell me, well, the deadline for early action is this time, but I'm thinking of doing my test score, which then could push me back to the next deadline. What I'm saying is, at least for our deadlines, we have 3: early decision, the binding, early action, and regular. If you wait until regular, for us, it does become much more competitive because we do that one kind of on a space basis. By then, we gave a lot of our offers to our early decision and early action. And between those two, we review the same. But if you wait until regular without the test score or with the test score, even if you get a perfect test score, it might still be much more competitive for you. So definitely work with the institution that you're looking at to apply, look at their deadlines, ask those questions because it will vary across institutions. We have a lot of similarities, like Tom mentioned, but there's still some things like that, you know, like deadlines where I would recommend, I would still say maybe you should still apply early action because you have more space available and chances for you to get an offer than waiting it out. So.
Yeah. That's another great point that I had not brought up. And you can also, again, there are humans you can reach out to and you can ask those questions and sort out what makes the most sense and say, hey, I'm applying early action. I have these other test scores coming in the future. So a school may also reach back out and say, we're going to hold off on this decision for a few more weeks until we see those scores. So it can be a whole ongoing conversation, I think.
I do just have one more comment too. Again, if I know that many schools, you know, they're asking, first of all, are you going to do test optional, right? And so once you do submit a score, right, you can't just say, well, oh, okay, I don't want to, I'm going to unsend it now, right? And so we can't unsee test scores, right? And so, you know, if you decide later, if you say, I'm not going to do tests, I know for us, and then later, if you then decide, well, I did get a test score, I'd want to submit it for consideration, as long as it's within kind of the shortly after the deadline, so that we hadn't already reviewed your application, then we would be able to consider that. And so, and again, it depends on the institution, but again, if you don't like submit it and then later say, oh, now I'm going to go test optional, because that is not the right procedure to do.
Right. Speaking of different kinds of tests that you can see or unsee, I think I'm curious, truly, this is one of the questions I get a lot. In general, we understand that AP scores and SAT subject scores are not really a critical part of most application reviews. Sometimes they're really kind of a helpful little we often tell our students icing on the cake, something interesting to show that you have this great accomplishment, you've mastered this material, but the weight of the transcript or the other components is typically more robust in your academic review. Do you anticipate in any way sort of looking more closely at IB scores or AP scores or subject test scores in the absence of the broader standardized testing?
At least for us, we actually always said that we didn't look at your score for the test. We only looked at your class grade.
Okay.
So we always did that. Now I always told students, that doesn't mean you go out there and not take that test serious, right? It just means that for you to get credit, you still need that score.
Right.
And not for admissions. In admissions, we're only gonna focus, at least for Virginia Tech, in your class grade.
Yeah, that's what we're going to do similarly, in terms of how we would evaluate an application. And so we've never required supplemental test scores, whatever. We've looked at it as optional, or if people choose to, then we will look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And we also know it's a, sit down, take a test one time. And
Right.
definitely, weighing more heavily, on a student's grades and the rigor of their curriculum and how they've done over the longer period of time.
That is comforting. As a teacher and principal, I used to always try and get my kids to realize that this was not the most critical 3 hours of your whole life, but there's such stress around those tests, I think, in high school.
It goes back to that. You spend a whole year in that class, there's your grade. You
Right.
spend 3 hours, there's a test score, right? So ideally, we're trying to be flexible too. So.
Yeah, where it would come into play, obviously outside of admissions, would then be, depending on your score, some colleges will give you pre-matriculation credit, right? And so,
Right.
so if you score a 3 or a 4 or a 5 on a certain exam, then you would be able to get credit for courses, prior to entering. And so again,
Right.
obviously it always benefits if you can try to do your best in an exam, but at least for the admissions point of view, we're not paying extra or special attention to those test scores at this time.
Great. 2 other thoughts on grades, and then we'll move on to maybe some more entertaining things. Do you anticipate it? Typically, most schools would not take a look at senior year first quarter grades for early admission. Just wondering if either of your schools or anyone you have talked to are anticipating shifting that at all, given that many students maybe didn't have substantive grades on their end of junior year report card, or if we're still sort of having a model of waiting till that whole first semester is over before we really see those grades in the college process.
At least for us, we actually always told students your senior grades, we don't get to see them for early decisions, so we're gonna try to keep it fair, and we won't, play a role in our decision for the next deadlines, just to keep it consistent. Now, again, we always say, it doesn't go back to you don't care about your final grades. You still need to do well. There's always a little clause that says, to rescind an offer.
Right.
But I always said, in general, all of our students that end up at Virginia Tech care about school and always end up stronger than ever. Now, the only thing that does play a big role will be your class selection, kind of going off what Tom said about that rigor. So that'll still play a big role in your senior year, is making sure you're still challenging yourself. I don't see us changing that this year, even if, there maybe previous year we didn't have many grades, and even if it was pass fails, we're still gonna keep it that way, at least for this year still.
Great.
Yeah, for us at Oberlin, our early decision deadline, we have 2 rounds. The first one's November 15th. And so we'll let families and students know the decision within a month. And so by December 15th, but we've actually, before we release any decisions, we do require, first quarter, first marking period grades before we would release a decision, even if it's unofficial in the sense that we can individually reach out to a school and get a guidance counselor to let us know what that will be. So we do check those grades, and then obviously, like anything, any decision that we would release, there is that clause. It's dependent upon the continuation of the rigor of your curriculum, your grades,
Yep.
Disciplinary issues too. So that,
Yep.
that
I tell them that every year. I tell them.
you gotta end strong. You gotta end strong, right? So
We all tell them. Well, and also what I always remind them is that's my dog who's very angry at the neighbor. That there's still a lot of high school left. Like we've moved the college process earlier and earlier so that students are thinking about it in ways that I think can be really positive for their intentional selection of their next steps. But it sort of masks the fact that you have a quarter of your high school experience left at that point, and you want to take advantage of it. You want to still dig into those classes and also not have your offer rescinded. So it's good to know that everyone is singing the same tune. And then just one other thought on this question. A couple of you, but I think you both had mentioned the other pieces, the other ways that we learn about academics from students. And often those come from, certainly from transcript rigor and course selection, and then also from letters of recommendation from teachers and from counselors. I think in-school counselors, school-based counselors are feeling a good deal of pressure this year to write those letters in a way that it is robust and individual. But in many cases, they don't have strong personal relationships with each of the students on their caseload. And maybe they were just starting to build those relationships in March. And so, do you have any advice for students? That most of the school systems in the Washington, D.C. area are virtual right now. Some of them are hoping to go back to school sooner rather than later. Do you have any thoughts on how students can build those relationships with their teachers, or try and connect with those folks writing those letters, or things you might like them to emphasize, or any of the counselors on the call that might be interested in kind of knowing how to manage that in this sort of unexpectedly virtual environment?
I know it's been a difficult year for everyone. I would say that, I have 4 kids myself, or 5 kids, but I have 4 of them in school right now. And so I know it's been difficult even for them to kind of get to know their teachers a little bit better, within the classroom and with all the different breaks. There's just a lot of times it's outside of the traditional, like, what you would consider instruction, like lecture, this and that. It's those side conversations that really
Right.
kind of build a relationship. I guess a couple words of advice for me is that you can still, I would traditionally say that students, should try to get, instructors from their senior year, but you can use any instructor or any teacher that you've had. And so it may be good to ask someone that you had your junior year, that at least for the first half of the year had you in person. They saw you through the transition, however your school and the environment, your community had to react to all the different changes that happened this last spring. And so typically when I see a guidance counselor, if they're writing a letter, I think they're more kind of rounding out and giving you a broader picture of the student, where a teacher that had you in class and had you consistently day in, day out can really speak to your academic side. And so I'm really looking at that. Realistically though, it's rare that I ever see a bad teacher recommendation, right? And so that's kind of like the kiss of death. Like if you have a bad teacher recommendation, it's like, gosh, first of all, why did that student ask a teacher
Right.
that wasn't able to write positively about you? But again,
And why did the teacher say yes?
Yeah, I know. That's right. When you just, some of these brutally honest ones, but again, that's so far, again, over the last, 19 years that I've been reading, teacher recommendations and essays, there's only been a handful that have been negative, right? And so, but again, you just need to prep, ask early. These are the basic things. And then if you need to write up a quick resume or touch on certain points, or maybe a highlight that you learned out of that class, or and provide that to the to the teacher along with deadlines, right? Just that's the main. You got to stick to deadlines, but give your teachers plenty of time. But then also, if it means just a quick bullet points of, here's some things that I felt that I learned in your class, or an area if I struggled with, or there was a dip, here's the reasons why. Can you address this if you needed to talk? That'll just really help, instead of just leaving it up to the teacher to come up with all the words and the right way to really adequately reflect the type of student that you've been.
I wanted to go definitely second since it might be a short answer, but at Virginia Tech, we actually don't request letters of recommendation and they don't play a role in our decision. This, I think, has been the last 2 years. This will be the third year that this is the case. And I know some counselors may be super happy, others may not be so happy, right? But ideally, if there is something that you do want to explain that is out of the ordinary of a student, we usually allow letter of circumstance. That's usually to explain if like there was some longer story, something else that needed to be told by someone else, whether it's even the student themselves or the counselor. So we do allow for counselors to submit something if they really need to, but as part of the decision process, we don't request letters of recommendation. Right? I have friends that they knew their counselors as best friends. My personal experience, I don't remember even their name, and I don't know what they wrote in my college application process. So I can imagine, we read thousands of applications. You all have to write thousands of these or hundreds. But so, it's I know it's always pros and cons for all, but that's kind of how our process right now looks like.
That's right. And depending on the school, again, there's so many great prep schools in the greater DC area, that guidance counselors and teachers know students really, really well, right? So
right. I do think it is a little bit easier in a smaller environment when you've had just more contact with your teachers, and you might have had a teacher more than once in that context too, because they tend to be a slightly smaller staff. One question that I think maybe is coming up in the Q&A, and I've had this from other counselors, as the counselor in particular is working on the counselor letter, do you recommend that they reflect at all or share information about how the school has responded to COVID? What may have happened with the grades or with the teachers, or is there any way in which, is that where that information should come from the school or in the school profile or from the student? Do you have any advice on that?
I'd like to speak to that. I know that, so I know that Oberlin, we use the common application as well as we're partners with the coalition application. So either one students can use, but both the common app and the coalition added a specific section that asks, how were you impacted, by the COVID pandemic? And so I think there's enough room, and it's one of them's like kind of open-ended. You can check a lot of different things. And so if it means like, oh, I had limited resources, or this is how it impacted this grade, that class, whatever. And so what it does is it would allow that for the essay in itself, that maybe you're not focusing in on the essay as a topic of COVID. You could write about that, right? But there's already a section that's fully dedicated to that in both of these kind of major applications. And so I would say that would be the place to. Obviously, if there was a very tragic circumstance as a result, or and it was just so overwhelming, then obviously if that was something that you chose to write your essay about, then again that will also be a reflection kind of who you are as a person and what's going on. That's really what we're trying to figure out, right? Is what kind of community member would this student be, and will they be successful, right? Because that's what we want. We want you to be successful, even if it means not at our schools, right? We want you to be successful, and so that's our main charge. And so to be able to, if it is, within that, I would say use those specific sections to talk about the impact that COVID has had. Unless it's something that is just has had such an extreme impact, and maybe it could be the essay. But I would think if there was any particular reasons that teachers want to talk about it, or even the guidance counselor in its overall, like, this is what we've done as a community, I would imagine there would be some section and opening in some sort of rec letter from a guidance counselor that give us
from the guys. But it sounds like most of your thought there is to empower the student to be able to reflect on what impact it has had, and not to place that burden on the counselor. Louisa.
Katy, I think I'm trying to make sure when I answer the right thing. You're talking about the grading, right? Potential grading options.
My initial thought was, it was sort of both. I think there is the question of the student communicating their experience, but also we had a couple of questions from counselors in particular about, like, how do I tell you that our kids we didn't get our Zoom underway for 3 weeks, or everyone was panicked, or one of our community members was ill, that the what we started with the question with the counselor letter, but I'm happy to kind of go wherever makes the most sense.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I definitely that section will explain anything. I always try to tell students there are things that may feel like common sense to you because you lived it, but if we don't know, if you don't tell us. And I always also challenge students whenever I talk to them to look at their profile of their high school, because that's what we tend to look at for anything and updates. And if we're digging up why was there a pass and then there's some grades in your transcript, that's where we're going to go. And I always go and I say, I challenge you to look at it because we are all trying to put the best of ourselves out up front, right? Including schools. And sometimes, like an example could be this class, AP Calculus, is offered dual enrollment, but nowhere in there explains that you had to have your own transportation and you weren't able to go. Same for maybe your teacher during COVID, something happened where your class, everybody got frozen with a grade at a certain point, right? That's the grade you got where you were standing. I always said at this point, it may seem common sense because you just, moving on. But if you don't tell us, we're not gonna know. We're just gonna assume what we can see. So that's what I say. And then when it comes to hopefully the passing fails, I know there were so many different options that happen. Personally, I can tell you that we're probably going to pay a lot of attention to those like transcripts that may look very different from sophomore year to what junior year grading looked like. And then that most likely will look at their school website. Now, if we don't find answers, I think we reach out to counselors and so on. I usually don't try to put that so much burden on the student, but I do tell them, if you don't tell us, we don't know.
Right. Let's shift a little bit because we haven't talked about any of the really fun parts of your job, which I know are about connecting to students. And the admissions industry and how quickly everyone has adapted to virtual connections and online opportunities, I think, for students to research schools, to learn about schools, not to be too East Coasty, but I think not all of my students are willing to look at schools in the middle part of the country, Tom. So I'd love to hear about how students should be making the most of all these virtual options, and really particularly maybe those students who are still sorting out their final list as seniors, but also those students who are just kicking off their college process maybe as juniors. How can they take advantage of this vast number of opportunities and also not be overwhelmed at the vast number of opportunities? Tom?
So first of all, I think that this is a great time at any time to think about a small school in a rural setting, right? So, right. So when you think about, hey, do I want to be in the middle of a big city and where lots of things could happen? Where I think it's a benefit, right? So I think that it's always been to our detriment when people think, what, a small town in Ohio in the middle of the country, right? Even though, again, 93% of our students come from out of state, right? And we're getting kids from all 50 states, 40 different foreign countries. So the majority of students that come to Oberlin are actually coming from the coast, right? And so we get more kids from New York and California than we do from Ohio. And if we look at large metro areas, like the DC area is like the fourth largest for us. It's first New York City's number one, San Francisco and the Bay Area is number two, and then Boston and then DC. And then after that, Chicago, right? So we get a lot of kids from there. But again, I understand location is could be a hurdle, but I think in this case, we've done really well in terms of kind of the type of environment that we're doing. We are offering in-person classes, and so we're de-densified, where every student has their own residence hall room, right? So their own dorm room by themselves, but then yet they're able to social distance and go to classes and do everything that they're doing. So how can you experience that? Obviously, I think there's ways, everyone has virtual websites now. You can go on, you can do tours. We do interviews. It is part of our admissions process. We do take into account like express interest, right? And I think obviously the most ultimate way to express interest is applying early, right? So we know that that's the equivalent of a marriage proposal, right? And so Like it is binding. It should be binding, right? In that sense that, of how interested you are in a school. So we're looking at that, but we also know because of travel restrictions and everything else that, some people can't come to campus, and we're actually still doing one family at a time with one tour guide. So we are still open for tours and that kind of stuff too.
Wow.
So we are having visitors, and so no walk-ins, but you have to register in advance. But we'll give you one tour guide that will meet you out in the parking lot, and they'll walk you around campus. You're not allowed to go in any buildings, but you can see everything and you can talk about it. But interviews are a great way also to experience a campus, because here's what what you're missing is that you're unable to visit a class, and you're unable to kind of see what's the student life like, right? And so I think that more and more colleges are putting stuff out there where there are many lectures online, and you can use that virtual side. You can go and talk and do these kind of smaller hangouts with students, and then kind of figure out what's going on. I know there's a lot of schools that are putting out regional events that say, hey, I'm going to invite everyone from the DC area to a Zoom thing, and I'm going to invite a couple current students, and they'll talk about their experiences of why they chose, Oberlin in Ohio when they came from DC or Maryland or wherever, and so I think that to try to get that sense of what the student life is like, and I think that people will be pleasantly surprised. I think that right now we've just seen just an uptick in the number of students that are coming to a lot of our virtual events, especially, even international students that before they never used to be able to do stuff, but now everyone could log in, everyone can get some form of on-demand content as well as live content. And so make sure that you kind of look at those. You can look at the things at your leisure in terms of YouTube playlists and all the different videos that are out there. But definitely take advantage of the live events where you're able to ask a question and you're able to interact with some students. And I know for us, we're always willing to connect prospective students with current students. If it's even from your area, it's like, hey, if you want to talk to someone, from your region, or someone, if you're interested in biology or neuroscience or history, we can also connect you with someone there in that department, and really take advantage of that. And because I just know that faculty, they just love to talk about what they do. And so if we can try to help facilitate some of those connections, we want to be able to do that.
That's great. And Louisa, what about you?
I think when looking at the great fun things that we can do now is you can just be sitting one day visiting Virginia Tech in Virginia, and then log off and be in California visiting UCLA or something, right? So I think that's amazing, like if you think of it that way. And in the past, a lot of us weren't giving these virtual tours, virtual visits.
Right.
So I do think if you think of it that way and students take advantage of that, that's amazing, I think. I never thought about, oh, let me just turn this off and talk to, let me go look at a school in Canada. I don't know, right? So I think that's something that definitely students should take advantage of. Visit us virtually. Yes, our area too is located in the beautiful mountains and lots of New River Valley and all of that. So definitely to our safety and benefit for right now. I know in the past I used to always tell students, look, you're still always busy in school anyways. You don't have time to even go to the mall. So you won't miss the mall that much. And we still have a mall, but it's a little bit farther down, But so that's definitely one thing. Another thing is I would definitely also say a lot of programs used to be limited for capacity. So now those things, like I can tell you, I do a lot of our summer programs, summer events, and just even like current events. And guess what? Zoom can host 500 people sometimes, 1,000 people we pay for more, right? So when you think of it that way, depending on the program, right, take advantage of that. I know for example, for one of the programs I do is I still try to create small group and breakout rooms. In the past, maybe, you wouldn't be talking to the person next to you because you'd be a little shy. But now maybe if you turn off your camera for my introvert students, you can feel comfortable maybe asking more questions, getting out of your comfort zone, right? So I'm just trying to think of all the positives, possibilities that we have now with this time and era, right? But that's just some examples, but I would definitely say take advantage of that. You can reach anywhere you want in the world, probably now that most things are virtual. So think of it that way.
Right. I think one of the things that I'm hopeful for is that maybe it's creating a little more access to learning about schools, to not just to schools in Ohio that I would never have looked at when I was a snotty Washington, D.C. kid, but just in general, many students don't have the time or the resources or the capacity to visit many campuses. And so it is nice. I know a lot of students are feeling so much anxiety about trying to narrow down a college list when they haven't been able to visit campuses. And so being able to remind them that these things are out there, and that, as Tom said, you can talk to an actual student and find out things from that student, or you can talk to a professor, is, I think, for those students who are taking advantage, is a real comfort. I'd love to know, just Tom, since you mentioned the opportunity for students to ask questions of either their tour guide or one of these virtual connections, do you have any top favorite questions that a high school student should be asking when they're looking at a college to get a sense of the student life?
Again, I think just to get a better sense, I think a lot just asking like, well, what do students do on the weekends? Like, what's the nightlife like, or what's the social life in general? I think that can say a lot, right? Obviously I'm biased because I've been at a school that's a small school in a small town. And so I think that, I find myself constantly like addressing that and combating that, because we get a lot of students from large cities. But then, what my answer, which is also true, it's not just an answer just to be an answer, but in the sense that being a small college in a small town is that students aren't dependent upon like a large city to create the environment. So they create the culture that they're in, right? And so they're and you can imagine, any community that you're in with 3,000 of your peers, and they're all young, and they're from all these different areas, and even a lot of like discussions, right? Yes, you're going to have dedicated faculty that love to teach and that just want to ooze their topic out of every pore of their body. But a lot of the discussions that you're going to have are going to be outside the classroom, and it's when you're walking across the quad, or when you're up at 3 a.m. in the morning in the dorms with people down your hall, and those discussions, that's going to be college, right? And so how do I get a sense of what that is? Or is it an ultra, like, is it again, is it more of a preppy school? Is it really uptight? Is it super competitive, or is it chill? And you find that out about, like, do people go to the games? What about like a special lecture or a performance? Like, those are the kinds of cool things that it's hard to tell. Just, yes, you can look at pictures and you can do things, but to try to get a sense of what students are doing, it says a lot.
Yeah, and to add to that, I definitely do agree. All those were great questions. I would say I love when, if the representative you're interacting with mentions they're an alum, I always challenge you to ask them what their favorite thing was about being part of that community, right? Because it is their personal opinion, but it is something that they live through. So you can always tell, how passionate they could be about that school. So I definitely recommend asking about that. If, and even if they didn't were alum from the school, I always say, you can always ask what it's like being in the community at the university, because maybe we're not students, but we're interacting with faculty members, we're interacting with administrators. So we still get a good sense of the environment and community, maybe not directly as much with the undergrad students, right? But maybe a lot more with the faculty and professionals, depending on who you're talking to.
And you still see homecoming and traditions and have a sense of what students are.
You hear anecdotes whenever you ask a story or any story. And then I also would challenge you to ask the university what their retention rate is from first year to second year. I think that's huge, because then I always, I know we like to brag that our students are very happy and always returning back to campus, right? And I always tell students, and if you do get a chance to visit, pay attention how many people might be wearing the swag from the school. That tends to show a lot of the pride of the school, right? And how students just want to show off their Virginia Tech. Count how many bumpers you see with the Virginia Tech little sticker. Those are some little advice that I just challenge you to pay attention to, because it definitely shows the pride of the school.
There's certainly a lot of Hokie pride. That is
Yes.
many ways to see that. Tom, did you want to jump back in? Sorry, I feel like I cut you off. Okay, great. I know we have just a few minutes left, but since both of you have pointed out, I think a really important piece of conversation that a lot of students are having now is, living through this pandemic. I think people realized there were assumptions we were making about all sorts of parts of our lives that we maybe want to investigate a little more. And part of that was about going farther away to college, or going to college in a city I didn't know as well, or some things that seemed like grand adventures, but maybe were more problematic when this crisis hit. So I think families are asking a lot of smart questions. So given that both of you have already described that your communities are a little further away from an urban center, but that may be part of why you've been able to successfully, although I'm sure very carefully, reopen your campuses. I would love to know a little bit about how that experience has felt. And then also, so the students we're talking about right now are thinking forward to what lessons am I learning right now for choosing a college for next year? So are there some things that you're seeing on your campus that you think will be changed forever, things that will shift, things that can give students insight into kind of understanding what they're looking at when they're looking at college? I know this is a very sort of abstract question, but I'm just kind of curious what insights you might have from these first couple of weeks of school that might help inform our students as they consider their college choices.
I know just the change that we went through. So what was different with Oberlin, right? So for this year, we went from 2 semesters to 3 semesters to try to de-densify. And so not everyone is on campus at the same time. And so, again, depending if you're a first year or second year, third year, then you might be either fall, spring, or spring, summer, or fall, summer. And so just to try to get everyone on campus at the same time. So that definitely was different in the sense that students coming in and, immediately every student got tested, and then we're tested once a month. And so everyone quarantined in their dorm rooms. As soon as you came, you unloaded, you went and got your test, and then you had to stay in your room for up to 3 to 5 days until you got your test result back. And so literally a lot of staff were like, we had to sign up for volunteers to go do food distribution to the residence halls, and it's just a whole community all pulling together. Mm-hmm. I had a conversation with a young man over the weekend because we do something in Oberlin called art rental, where kids can rent pieces of art from the art museum and take it to their dorm room. And I was, so it's a fee of $5, but you can, there's actually a Picasso, a Monet, there's Andy Warhol. So it's this incredible thing, and it's such a great tradition.
So cool.
And so students traditionally they would camp out overnight in the courtyard of the art museum, and so then they could be first in line to pick this art. And so it was different this year. Obviously, they didn't know camping out overnight. They had people almost a whole entire block away, like standing in line 6 feet apart, waiting for the artwork. And I was talking to this kid Mitchell from Denver School of Arts from Colorado, and I said, "Is this what you expected?" And he's like, and again, we're wearing masks, we're socially distanced, and I'm talking to him, and he's like, "No, this is not at all what I expected my first year to be. But I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad that there's still ways to be social. There's still ways to talk to people and connect with people from all over the world, all over the country. And yeah, it's a little bit different. We're trying to be safe. We're doing testing once a month." He's all, "But man, I love my professors, the faculty members, and I feel that I'm having a great time." And all this while carrying a piece of artwork back to his dorm room, put it in his dorm room. And so I think that colleges are being very thoughtful in trying to change some things, but still continue to operate in a way that students are still getting a great education, and they're still finding ways to connect with each other. Mm-hmm. We did even concerts and all the things, right? We put on 500 plus concerts a year at Oberlin. And so that's like 3 every single day on average, typically, but a lot of things have changed. And so right now, like in the open square, they did a concert where people were placed all around the open square, and they were playing the same piece of music. And so as you walked around the square, you got this different acoustic effect because they were in sync playing, but located across a whole entire park. And so
Wow.
there's just ways that I think that people come together, that they're creative and saying, how can we continue to pursue, art, science, research, all these things while wearing masks and trying to social distance. And so, I think we can plan as much as we want to plan, and we can say this is what we think we're going to do, but it can change in a week. And so I think there's a lot of contingency planning, and the key word is just to be flexible. And so that was how we were the whole summer. We made all these plans, and then we had to scrap them because it changed and things kept changing. And I think that, there's a lot of people that care about students in the community, and they want to continue to make sure that we can provide some sort of education in a meaningful way. And I think we'll find it. We'll eventually get there, but I think it's going to take a lot of, just being flexible.
And Louisa.
Oh, so many things, right? That has been a learning curve for all of us, definitely. A couple of things, I guess, for us, you're definitely going to be getting free masks around campus. Giving away all the time. I got a lot. And, it's been teaching us about access about education for our professors, doing virtual classes, hybrid. We've kind of laminated, it might not be the exact word, but some desks so they're easier to clean. We made an app called Hokie Ready app, where you have to do it every day, a self-assessment before you step on campus to make sure you're asking yourself the right questions about your health. We also tested everybody that was on campus. And us being a big research one institution, we were able to utilize all of our resources in that sense. Like, I think our capabilities were 1,000 tests a day if we had to do that much. So it was definitely a extensive plan for us, and I do see a lot of things possibly staying around. Like, why do we need to get rid of the hand sanitizers now, right? They're everywhere. I know.
I like it.
The little things, the little things always stand out. But no, things like that. Now, I'm pretty sure now professors are going to be more open to having hybrid classes and teaching online, having at least a class online and maybe the rest in person, right? A lot of our facilities have been kind of shifted how they look. Now we do a lot of outdoor recreational activities like yoga under the stars. Beautiful things to do outdoors. We created spaces for students to kind of study outside. I don't see why those things could necessarily need to go away, right? There's so many things that we've been learning that I definitely hope and I think could stay around, and it's definitely taught us. But in general, I think our biggest message is we take care of each other. We put a lot of the pressure and responsibility on the students. We say, that Hokie pride you have, make it so you can take care of each other, and make it so we all stay here and we stay healthy and happy. So we definitely have been putting a lot of message out there for our students, as well as, signs everywhere. And then last but not least, our leadership, they've been crucial in influencing our students, right? It's kind of like show us by example. You see the president walking around campus all the time. You always saw him walking around because he actually has a home on campus. That's her house. And you see him walking now with a mask, right? Everywhere. Even if there's nobody around 6 feet, he still should wear a mask. So little things like that, our leadership, our students, we definitely have been learning. But I think the overall message is it's all of our responsibility, and we all need to take care of each other as Hokies.
I can't think of a better way to end our conversation tonight. Thank you both for bringing us back to community and humanity and all the ways that we can love one another. So thanks for making my job significantly easier than it could have been. And thank you both truly for joining us this evening. And thank you to all of our viewers. Please do reach out to edplanning@prepmatters.com if you have any additional questions or suggestions or comments. Our next town hall meeting takes place 2 weeks from tonight on Wednesday, September 30th at 7 p.m., where Jeff Knox and I will dig into how to make the most of your extracurricular options for a great high school experience and college admissions process. I hope that everyone is staying safe and healthy. I wish all of you the very best.